Welcome, friends, one and all. Those of you who follow our bulletin closely will notice that I am not Stephanie Everett Kirkbride. Stephanie is here with us in spirit today, but she has sick children at home. And so she called to say that regrettably she could not join us. And I want to use that as an opportunity to recognize the rhythm of these holy days. Let us begin by calling in the quarters so that we might make this circle complete. Let there be a light kindled from the Spirit. Blessed be the eastern gate. Blessed be the element of air. Let there be a light increasing and illuminating. Blessed be the southern gate, and blessed be the element of fire. Let there be a light radiating. Blessed be the western gate, and blessed be the element of water. Let there be a light reflecting. Blessed be the northern gate, and blessed be the element of truth. One of the things that I know Stephanie would have likely shared with you is that in the last few seasons, she has become an amateur farmer. She's an artist in many ways, and her art has led her into the fields, and she now tends a field of organic Honeycrisp apples. And if you were lucky enough to join her last week, they made applesauce out of those. And what I want to point out for your gathering this morning is that there are many transformational rhythms happening in the act of farming and bringing through air and light and earth the manifestation of something sweet and rich that by eating it becomes something more. How might this season of harvest be reflective of that powerful, transformative spirit which lives and moves and has its being in us all? Stephanie is also a mother, and she watches children become and knows that, like tending a field, she will not ultimately control who each of these beautiful creatures becomes, but she is willing to stand with them. We stand with each other in this community. And that is worthy of worship. May it be so.
As our musicians take a deserved break, let me give you a few words from a sacred source in the sequence of readings that attach to the Jewish tradition. The words of Isaiah turned up yesterday. It's a long book. He turns up a lot. This is a passage from chapter 55, the first few verses. Ho, all who are thirsty, come for water, even if you have no money. Come, buy food and eat. Buy food without money, wine and milk without cost. I'll just stop right there. It's a long passage. I just want you to have those words of the prophet inviting people to come and eat and drink without paying. I don't think that would be a welcome sentiment in our local economy, but... And now I'm going to stretch you even a little further, because I'm going to start in a different language, but you need to hear the words as they came out of Dante's mouth, and then I'll give them to you as you can hear them. The first words, the first terza rima from Dante's Commedia. Nel mezzo del cammino della nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la dritta via è smarrita. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straight forward pathway had been lost. Ah, quanto arir qual era e cosa dura esta selva selvaggia e aspra e forte che nel pensiero rinnova la paura. Ah me, how hard a thing it is to say what was this forest, savage, rough and stern, which in the very thought renews the fear. There are always people who are visiting us for the first time, including our musicians. Thank you ever so. I'm in the midst of a long, shall we say, sketch of our church's history, which is also liberal religion's story in its own way. And if you're new to us, you might be saying, where do I plug in here? And I can't tell you. But I hope in the sequence of these remarks today and in others, you will find your own thread captured, which is my way of saying you can't get it all in one Sunday. The practice of worship is something that, like exercise, must be done more than once every year or two to make a difference. In sketching the history of this church, I have come to a crisis in time. In 1933, my predecessor, Alfred Wesley Wishart, died scarcely 4 days after delivering a sermon. In other words, they didn't expect it, and neither did he. His death left the church without its longest-serving minister to date, the leader who was here when the old building burned and the new building was built, magnificent, thrilling, and beautiful, and mortgaged to the hilt. And it was 1933, and for those who might be a bit younger than me, that was the depth of the Great Depression. The 30s were tough times in America and elsewhere. There were tough times in the nation. There were tough times for the church. Maybe that's the reason they reached out and plucked a man named Milton McGarrell, who arrived here in 1934. He was a Mainer, as they say up in Maine, where rocky soil and rolling sea punish those with too much confidence in the human strength. You might say he was a conservative liberal. That may sound impossible, but we should remember two things. One is that skepticism is a conservative trait, even when applied to religion. And that conservatism is an attitude well before it was an ideology. An attitude similar to those hard-scrabble Mainers and other New Englanders who were always suspicious of promises without much to back them up. McGarrell was truly of this spirit, the spirit of the times, and perhaps the spirit of this church when fortunes were uncertain. David Rankin, who was twice removed from Milton McGarl, the minister who served here in the 80s and the 90s, designated Milton McGarl the martyr of Fountain Street Church, a role that suited him in some ways, I'm sure. Conservatism, after all, always expects things to go wrong, and if you wait around long enough, they will. By contrast, liberalism expects everything to go right, which, again, if you wait long enough, it will. Until the Great Depression, Fountain Street Baptist Church had experienced 50 straight years of increase and expansion. Oh, there were bumps along the road, the fire being one of them. But the arc of its story was ever higher and further. Every adversity, including the fire, was but a part of a longer journey, the heroic quest. But in the 1930s, the adversities came one after the other. Adversity gained the upper hand, and instead of going onward and upward forever, we were going downward and inward. We like the idea of journeys, don't we? We use them as a spiritual metaphor all the time. In fact, it's a great anthropological metaphor. Last week I invoked it directly when I reminded us all that we celebrate the pilgrims who came here from another land, and that almost all of us, and eventually all of us who live here, including the native peoples, came from someplace else. In fact, every human being comes from a place in Africa, if you go back far enough. We are wandering creatures, pilgrim creatures. And sometimes that's exciting and thrilling to be on adventures. But what happens when the adventure turns not adventurous, but frightening? I was 3 years old when my father, who loved exploring the back roads of Maryland, drove us down a dirt path to an old bridge on his topographic map. And as we go around the bend to see the bridge is gone. Well, the road is on the other side, and it keeps going, and we get out, he gets out, he looks at the little river there. It's not very deep. Let's drive across it. We got stuck. And so there we were, he, my mother, me, and my little brother in arms, with our car stuck in a shallow river in the backwoods of Maryland. And so we walked back to the main road. By the time we got there, remember, I'm 3 years old, so we're not going too very fast. It was beginning to get dark, and the only place we could see was a shack of a house on the main road. So we had to knock on their door, and they, bless us all, let us in. They did have a phone, and the owner did allow my father to call for a tow truck. But even at 3, I can remember that they were poor. I knew that because they used an old blanket to separate the front room from the back room, and that they had no electric lights, only kerosene lamps. And no, I'm not that old. The tow truck came, and I watched them bring our car, a gray 4-door Willys, out of the woods. My mother was angry at my father, and she was somewhat ashamed of having to impose upon these poor strangers. I tell this story because we've all had moments like these in our lives, and we've all felt the anger and the shame. I want to point to those emotions. Anger and shame are the frequent outcome of thwarted journeys. What did I do wrong, we ask. I feel like such a fool, we think. To me, though, it was just a wonderful adventure. During McGarl's decade, I should point out, a lot of adventures took place. Good things went on. He broadcast on the radio, the first of our ministers to be on the air. The mortgage on the new building got smaller in the 10 years. Amelia Earhart stood in this pulpit and addressed the congregation. So did Eleanor Roosevelt. According to David Rankin, who wrote sermons about each of our senior ministers, his preaching was admired. The music was inspired. Children learned. But what the church wanted was what it didn't get. People showing up. Dollars in the plate. These did not happen. A gradual but continual decline had set in. The church expected their journey from greater to continue. The one they had been on for 50 years, no one remembered any other one. And then when the story became different, they were angry and ashamed. It's hard not to see the similarities now and then, isn't it, for those of you who've been around for more than 10 or 20 years. And here is where I must risk being more personal. But in the Christian lectionary today, Paul is speaking to the Thessalonians, and he gives me encouragement. He writes to the Thessalonians, "So deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel, but our own selves, because you have become very dear to us." You are very dear to me. In all the churches I have served, I have never loved a church or a people more than I have loved you, and I have loved you more than others, and the other churches would not be glad to know that. But I have thrown in my lot with you. No one has claimed my heart more than you have. Nor have I ever wanted to build up a church more than I wanted to build up this church with its great and glorious history. And yet it has not happened. I have tried. And more than one of us, including yours truly, have thought, if only we could get back to the way we were. David Rankin says McGarl tried to do just that. In Rankin's words, he tried to revive the church by reliving its past. I understand that completely. So do you. When times are hard, we become more cautious. We tend to be more, quote, conservative. When we get lost, what do? We retrace our steps to the point where we know where we are. But of course, that's a problem. My father trusted his map, that it was accurate about what laid ahead. When we use the past as a map for the future, we should expect it to be inaccurate. Remember Lincoln's famous words delivered to Congress in 1862, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, we must think anew and act anew." The case in the 1930s was new. It was unprecedented, unseen before. It was a Great Depression. But the church and the minister did not think and act anew. They acted as they always had. Rankin says, liberal religion depends on continual growth and constant creativity. But it should be pointed out, it's the creativity that creates the growth. Not the growth, the creativity. One could say in history that Franklin Roosevelt succeeded compared to Herbert Hoover, not because he did all the right things, but because he did something. Because Herbert Hoover said, well, let's just stay the course. And people said, well, the course we're on is driving us off a cliff. Someone make a turn, please. And not all of Mr. Roosevelt's ideas worked. Many of them failed. But everyone knew that going back in time was not wise or even possible. And the people followed Roosevelt, not because he knew where he was going, but because they knew that no one knew where they were going and that we had to find a new way. In my 10 years, I've tried a lot of things. Not as many as Thomas Edison, who went through 6,000 filaments before he found the one that made the electric light go. But I've been through enough to be occasionally frustrated and dispirited, and maybe you have too. And we've all had times like that in our personal lives. We've all had dreams that didn't come true, jobs that we sought that didn't come to be, or jobs that we wanted that were lost. We've all had our plans ruined. We've all seen our love lives turn out a little less dramatically wonderful than we thought. And we see these tough moments as failures, but we should also consider them like Dante's spiritual forests. Nel mezzo del cammin della nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark. Who hasn't been in a dark forest at least once in your life? Who hasn't felt that? You could say that the Halloween season is an acknowledgement that there are dark forests everywhere, every time and in every life. It's a tamed reminder that struggle is part of every journey. Well, what do you do when you're in a strange and dark forest? I'll tell you what I did. Halfway on my walk along the Camino de Santiago in Spain last year, I woke up and it was driving rain. I mean, it was coming down in great heaving buckets. Noah came to mind. My innkeeper knew almost no English, and I was the only one in the inn besides him. The village was tiny, the bar was closed. My suitcase was waiting for me 15 miles away. I had no choice but to keep going. And so off I went down the road, squeaking and sloshing, soaked to the bone, 15 miles to my next location. Midway through that afternoon, I admit the rain had stopped, but now I was lost. I was in a village. I knew only enough Spanish to find the men's room and perhaps a restaurant. My map made no sense at all, and the little scallop shells that are used to tell you which way to go were nowhere to be found. I retraced my steps. I went this way. I went that way. I went around in circles. I kept looking down. I looked at my map. And then, when I could no longer find my way the way I was told, I looked up. And there on a building in the masonry was a scallop shell. And the sun came out. No kidding. The prophet Isaiah is a mythical person, might have existed, but most of the book was written over well more than a century. But they share a great hope, no matter who wrote it. That great hope is that the promise made to Israel will not go unfulfilled despite constant setbacks. And if you know Jewish history, it is not a history of success. So where does Isaiah come off saying, come for water, even if you have no money? Come buy food and eat. Buy food without money. Where does this hope come from? This wild hope? I don't know. But it has sustained Jews for 3,000 years. And the Assyrians who conquered them are dust. And the Babylonians who carried them off into exile have vanished. And the Romans who occupied them are now gone, and they continue. I cannot help but wonder if that hope, that somehow the promise would be fulfilled, that faith that had no basis at all, kept them going through the forest, the dark forest, pressing on. I ask, what is our wild hope? The hope that Mr. McGarl wouldn't have known because he kept saying the way to the future is into the past. And that's where I disagree with him. The way to the future is into the future. It is not down a path we know, but toward a path we don't know. For America, because our election is nearby, that path or that destination, that hope, that goal, that faith is liberty and justice for all. And every election asks you to decide which way we're going to turn to try to get there. So when you go to the polls in a week or so, ask yourself which one will get us closer to liberty and justice for all. That's what you vote for. And for Fountain Street Church, the dream has been, always has been, and is still forming, is creating what that same prophet Isaiah called a house of prayer for all people. A place where everyone comes and everyone belongs and everyone worships and everyone is loved. That has been the dream of this church for over a century, and how to get there is the question, not where we are going. Do I know? Not a clue. Nobody does. But that's why I'm a man of faith, because faith is believing there is a path, that there is a scallop shell, that there is a direction, even when you don't know where it is. And pressing on until you find it. When all else fails, press on. Press on. May these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. Amen.